Maybe in school you read the Declaration of Independence and you read the words that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. But what does that mean? We're going to talk about that and more. We've got a great show on today's edition of Truth and Liberty. Dr. John G. West, prolific author, and later on, Dran Reese of the Salt and Light Council. We're going to get equipped. We're going to internalize truth and be able to influence others for that truth. Welcome to this edition of Truth and Liberty.
Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Hi, Alex McFarland here. Welcome to Truth and Liberty, the show that's about you and all of us being equipped and empowered to help make a difference in this world, and frankly, in the long run, to be used by God to help save a nation. Well, you know, we're in a battle of worldviews, and more than ever, people are coming back to our founding documents, really the ad fontes, the source materials for this constitutional America. And I've recently received a book called Endowed by Our Creator. It's by an author that I've come to appreciate very much, Dr. John G. West, and he's got an amazing resume. We'll talk about not only his most recent book, but one from about a year ago as well. He's with us now on the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Dr. John G. West, thank you for being with us today.
Alex, thanks for having me. It's a delight.
Before we get into some of your books and some of the kind of worldview battles that we need to talk about, I want you to bring people up to speed on the work you do with Discovery Institute, and not only as a writer and speaker, but basically serving God and country as an academic that I believe you do so well. But tell us about yourself and your career.
Sure. So I've sort of split between academia and the think tank world. And so I was a college professor at a historically Christian university that unfortunately fell away, which is part of the topic of my last book. And then now, though, I'm affiliated again with the Christian University, a great Christian school called Cornerstone University in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I'm helping to develop some of the curriculum where students will learn about the Declaration of Independence and sort of the biblical roots of it. And then in the think tank world, I'm vice president of Discovery Institute. I co-founded their program basically on intelligent design with philosopher Steve Meyer, actually 30 years ago this year. So the other part of me is sort of involved in some of the debates over Darwin and intelligent design and sort of scientific materialism. It's Darwin's corrosive impact on culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I've known Dr. Stephen Meyer for probably 20 plus years. We worked together at Focus on the Family, and then in the ID, intelligent design world, of course, William Dembski that has spoken for us in a number of conferences. Before we get to the Constitution and the government, let's talk about that for a little bit. For those that may be unaware, what is intelligent design, and why does this subject raise such a visceral reaction oftentimes from those that are the entrenched Darwinists?
Yeah. So for most of human history that we know, even before like the New Testament, people debated whether are we the product of chance and necessity or a mind. And of course, the Bible teaches we're the created by a supra-rational, supreme God, and who created all of us. But that's been a debate for much of human history. And in our own age, say the last 150 years, Charles Darwin popularized the idea that basically random mutations acted on by natural selection, this sort of blind, purposeless process could get you us and everything about nature. And so really, Darwin himself may have been agnostic, not a sheer atheist, but his theory was designed to say, well, that science has now proves that there really isn't a creator. And that's really the culture that we have lived in, all of us who have grown up, even the last 20, 30, 40 years. That's the legacy in which we have dealt with. Now, I think, why is this so controversial, or why does this stick around? Well, on the good side is, I think, I agree with Augustine that we have this God-shaped emptiness in our heart if we don't fill it with God. And so people, when you're tell people that we're just the product of blind, purposeless processes, people know in their heart that probably isn't true. On the other hand, we're in rebellion against God. So a lot of people gravitate, they want to hear that there's no God because then there's no claims on them for how they live or for getting right with God. So I think it's perennial because our human nature, we're broken before God, we're in rebellion against God, and so people are attracted to the idea that, well, maybe science shows there's no God. On the other hand, we're still created in the image of God. There's still that need, that recognition that in fact God does exist. And the great news now, as you know, I think, Alex, is just in the last 10 to 20 years, and even the last 5 years, I would say that the case for scientific materialism, this idea that science shows that God doesn't exist, that we don't need a creator, has pretty much collapsed. I mean, it's
Yeah.
collapsed in physics. Scientists recognize that there needs to be a beginning to time, a beginning to matter. It's collapsed in chemistry, where the sorts of finely tuned things happening in chemistry. You can't just build living things out of with no guidance. And then in biology, in the hearts of us, each of us, we have DNA, where that is actually a code, an information system, which my colleague Steve Meyer has sort of popularized. And so really, it's hard knocks now to be a serious scientific atheist because the science doesn't support it.
Yeah. I've got to give you an illustration. We were on a speaking tour, and we had a number of college students that were helping us. And one college student especially was having a faith crisis about, because of what he was learning in the state university. And I was talking to him about human DNA, which is basically complex encrypted data. And we were going, of all things, into Winnemucca, Nevada, which is a town in rural Nevada. We were doing a youth rally. Well, up on this hillside above the town of Winnemucca was a letter W in stones. Ginormous boulders were set to form a W. And I said to the student, I said, look, isn't that ironic? There is a letter W, and at the base of this hill is the town Winnemucca. And he said, yeah, what about it? I said, well, isn't it fortunate that those stones just randomly rolled in place like that? He said, no, somebody put them there. I said, I don't think so. I said, I think that letter W was just made by random natural processes. And he said, that's impossible. I said, look, if it took an outside intelligent causal agent to put one alphabet letter in place, why didn't it take an intelligent cause to create the 100 trillion copies of our DNA, which is infinitely more complex than one alphabet letter? But my point, Dr. West, is that the evidence is there, and minds can be changed if we can begin to get equipped and get engaged. Isn't that right?
Minds and hearts can be changed, and God uses evidence, and evidence does matter. And I think my one message, say, to my fellow Christians today on this issue is you no longer have to feel defensive, because the case for scientific atheism, if you will, has collapsed. And there really are very few serious scientific atheists. They haven't reproduced themselves. When we got started in this, there were people like Richard Dawkins at Oxford University. He's still around, but when he's now even calling himself a cultural Christian, he's still an atheist, but he sort of pines for what he repudiated, and he hasn't reproduced himself in the next generation because the actual science behind those claims have collapsed. And just on DNA, just one thing. When we started on this, we were talking about the message in the DNA, but now we know there are codes within codes. DNA is only one of the codes built in our genes. And so literally, if there are overlapping codes in our genetics. So it's not just one code that you have to explain as a product of blind, unguided processes. It's now multiple overlapping codes.
Talking about Richard Dawkins, and folks, if you don't know that name, and I think Dr. West would agree, I cannot overstate how influential, in a bad way, Richard Dawkins has been. But atheism had a real foothold in the UK and in Europe, but into the vacuum created by the retreat of Christianity has come largely Islam. And I remember Easter about 2 years ago when Dawkins was saying that on Easter morning, he heard the blaring of the Islamic minarets, but he did not hear the church bells, and suddenly he felt frightened. And you're right, he's pining for the Christianity that he once took for granted. But speak to us, if you would. Look, in the empty space created if Christianity goes, it's not just neutral, but in has come the iron fist of Marxism and the iron sword of Sharia, hasn't it?
Definitely. And one other area that is related to this that actually Dawkins now is very worried about, but he opened the door, he opened Pandora's box, is the transgender, nonsense, and actually, the thought that you can create different genders and that you could, do these dire surgeries on kids or adults to change their sex. Well, no, you're actually not. You're destroying their sexuality. But where does that come from? Well, Richard Dawkins is actually now horrified by this because he actually respects biology to a degree that there are just men and women. But who created this idea that men or women isn't something sacrosanct, that if you can just change your biology, why not? Well, once you say that our biology doesn't reflect the views of a transcendent designer, then there's nothing sacrosanct about being male or female. It's just what our technology can allow us to do. So why respect male and female if that was just an accident of evolutionary history? So although Dawkins himself is horrified by the modern transgender nonsense, which I give him credit for, he doesn't seem to recognize that he himself laid the groundwork, because once you deny that biology is the reflection of the intelligent design of a creator, then it only becomes, what is in our technological power to do? Because there's nothing special about male and female in that Darwinian worldview.
Dr. West, I'm on the road speaking like literally every weekend of the year, colleges, churches, and I've met many people that, a decade ago, they were engaging in all sorts of surgeries to become transhuman or non-human. And I've actually met a few people that tried to transition to a different gender and had extreme regret, thoughts of suicide. Here's the thing, in taking away God and rejecting Imago Dei, that we're made in God's image, it's not that we elevated our human experience. We've created something even worse than Frankenstein's monster. And not only are people physically and psychologically jeopardized, I would say spiritually as well. And you said it, Professor, that humanity is sacrosanct. We're made in God's image. And it's ever been Satan's desire to deface that image. I'll put it this way, and I want you to respond if you agree. Satan could not kill off God, so he's tried to harm, debase, dehumanize the ones made in God's image. Is that correct?
I think that's true, and it goes back to an insight that St. Augustine had, which is that Satan can't create anything. All he can do is twist the good things that God has created. And so that's why actually, even in evil things that you find, that there are often kernels of good, because ultimately Satan can't create. He can destroy, he can twist.
Yes, exactly. I want to get to your new book, but first, I've got to mention Stockholm Syndrome Christianity. Folks, about a year and a half ago, I was at a conference and I got a copy of this book, and I ended up getting about 8 or 10 copies to give colleagues. It is such a good book. Tell us about that book, the premise, and where people could find Stockholm Syndrome Christianity.
Yeah, so the premise was, it was a real head scratcher for me growing up and having a career originally in Christian higher education, when I saw so many self-identified Christians who personally, they worship God, they worship Jesus, and so I have no reason to doubt that in their personal lives they somehow were, evangelical Christians, but they acted more and more like the world, and that in fact their underlying worldview was more like the people outside the church than what they were getting from the Bible. And I was wondering, so why is this? It wasn't just cowardice. Sometimes it's cowardice, but these people end up really embracing the worldview of the other side. And I thought that this idea of the Stockholm syndrome, which goes back to the idea that sometimes if you're abused by someone or can be persecuted by a criminal, that if you're in a hostage situation, sometimes you can flip and end up identifying more with the hostage taker than with the police or other people. And I thought that really described what I was seeing in Christian colleges, among parachurch groups, among Christian politicians, among Christians in the media. And so that's how I came to write the book. And there's a whole website actually with free resources called StockholmSyndromeChristianity.com. That's StockholmSyndromeChristianity.com. So you can find out more about the book and just get a lot of free resources even without getting the book.
This goes way back, but like when in the 70s, folks, if you remember when Patty Hearst was taken hostage by, was it the Symbionese Liberation Organization or something? And eventually she, the hostage, was out brandishing a weapon, but it was really kind of self-survival. And, you know, I meet Christians who they capitulate on Darwinism, or they seem to be, you know, favorable to socialism, or even gay marriage or transgenderism. And, you know, I'm thinking, look, as a Christian, if you've believed in the Son of God, unapologetically believe in the Word of God, don't try to placate the enemies of God. That's kind of that Stockholm Syndrome mindset, isn't it?
It is exactly it. And again, you know, rather the real challenge is that many of these people, they don't realize that they're just compromising and, you know, they don't have spine. They've so internalized this, they actually thinking in some sense that they're doing God's work by doing the exact opposite of it. And so I'm trying to get them to help recognize that and help other people around them to recognize when this is happening so you don't play into it.
And I would encourage you folks, I mean, the book, and I get so many books, so if I really get keen on recommending a book, it's because it's deeply impacted my own life. Stockholm Syndrome Christianity by John G. West. He's our guest right now on Truth and Liberty. It would be a great book to give to a pastor, especially Christians and clergy that you suspect may be kind of going woke. But I thank you, by the way. Your publisher sent me a copy of what I think is your newest book on Endowed by Our Creator. Is that your newest book? And please tell us the premise of that one.
So if someone had told me that within a 2-year period I'd turn out another book, I think I would have said, what alternate universe are you in? But I really felt actually about this time last year. So this book was written just in 6 months. I felt late on after some time of prayer that, you know, this year is the 250th anniversary of America. But so many Americans, even Christians, sadly, don't understand our founding principles and how those founding principles didn't just grow out of, say, secular Enlightenment principles. They grew out of biblical principles. And that one of the reasons why things are so mucked up today is because we don't understand that. We don't understand the purpose of government. We don't understand where human rights come from. We don't understand that rights come from God. In fact, there's a shock poll. In conjunction with this book, just a few months ago, we released a poll of 2,500 American adults where we asked, well, where do our rights ultimately come from? Is it government? Is it God? Is it evolution? Is it, you know, just social tradition? You know, where do our rights, our fundamental rights, ultimately come from? And basically only 4 in 10 Americans right now think that our rights come from God. And the real shock is that that's the same for self-identified Christians. Now, I will say Protestant Christians are about 51%, so they're a little better. But even with Protestant Christians, you have like half the people who don't believe our rights come from God. And so I think that's sort of a wake-up call to me that we really need to teach our kids, teach ourselves, because these ideas matter. I mean, most revolutions in the world turned out bad. At the time of the American founding, the French Revolution, they list some things like human equality, but it came from a completely different worldview, and it turned into a bloodbath. The American Revolution, of all the major revolutions in modern history that we know about, it turned out differently. And I would argue that part of that reason, a key part of that reason, is because its principles were actually different, and they were built on what Francis Schaeffer used to call the biblical consensus. And many Christians don't even know that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And let me say even more disheartening, Dr. West, is the idea among so many Christians and even pastors and clergy that they don't see any connection between Christian citizenship and America. I mean, in American soteriology, salvation is, well, decades from now I'll die and go to heaven. But until then, aren't we called to be salt and light? Aren't we called to, be a preservative influence in our culture, and not just we trust Christ because I'll go to heaven, not hell, although that's a part of it, obviously. But until we get there, we're emissaries of truth, virtue, goodness, God's word, that, like Augustine said, until we're in the city of God, we have an obligation to the city of man.
We definitely do. And American Christians throughout American history have recognized that. And I just want to, just a real factoid that most people don't know about. You know, by the early 1800s, there was a spread of theological liberalism, even in America. There were a lot of Americans in the early 1800s who actually loved what happened in France. Now, there were many who didn't. And there were a falling away from Orthodox churches. But then, so that's say 1800, early 1800s. Fast forward to about 1850, 1855, and evangelical church attendance has revived and has taken over the nation. How did that happen? How did that re-Christianization happen? In those several decades. Well, it was something called the Second Great Awakening, and the Second Great Awakening was certainly a movement of God, but it was Christians called by God to establish things like the American Bible Society, the American Sunday School Union. People today hear Sunday schools, they think of various things. They don't understand that in the early 1800s, the way Americans became literate is there was a group called the American Sunday School Union, and that churches taught from the Bible, poor kids and others who couldn't go to school, literacy. They were, by the 1840s, they were educating hundreds of thousands of kids based on biblical principles, teaching them reading. That transformed society. There were a lot of other things, prison ministry. Today we have groups like Prison Fellowship, which are great, but actually in the 1820s and 30s, you had that. We revolutionized society as Christians in America and brought her back to Christ through the Second Great Awakening, through the things that God was doing, and because Christians realized that there is an appropriate, not the social gospel, the true gospel, but social impact of the true gospel that Christians recognized in many parts of our history. They did it again after the Civil War. They did it in the fight against communism. Obviously, the fight against abortion. I mentioned earlier Francis Schaeffer, people were raised up on that. And so the reason America isn't even worse than it is today is because of those faithful Christians. And it's the call now for Christians today to rise up and do the same thing. And God can do great things even with a little bit of obedience of people. We're not perfect, we're still sinful, but if we are obedient to God, he can do fantastic things for that. And I don't think sometimes Christians they don't know anything about American history, so they think it's sort of this line, well, we were Christians and then now we're not. Actually, there's been rise and fall of various heresies and other things in American history, and bad social things from slavery, to abortion today. But faithful Christians, when they actually acted the way God asked them to do in society, there were dramatic changes, and that can still happen today.
Amen. Amen. Well, yeah, I think about the First Great Awakening that was present during the colonial era and the American Revolution. The Second Great Awakening that, as you said, righted some of those spiritual and cultural problems of the mid 1800s. And then, there was a couple of great movements in the early 20th century, the Jesus movement of the mid 20th century. Dr. West, if the past is a predictor, and we've got these 50 to 70 year cycles, are we on the cusp of another Great Awakening? I would say a much, much needed Great Awakening in America. Might we hope that we're on the doorstep of another great move of God's Holy Spirit?
I hope so, but I have to I'm not a Pollyanna, so I want to be really brutally honest. We also know that nations get self-destructive and they end. And so I think we have a choice. I think that if we are faithful to God's calling, that yes, we have a great opportunity to see another great awakening, if you will, and a transformation. But the other side of that is, if we're not willing to do that, this idea that I think some Americans have, and even some American Christians, that, oh, things will never get really, we're not going to go the way of the Roman Empire. We're not going to go the way of a lot of places that no longer exist today because we're America. Nope, that's not true. And so I
Yeah.
do think that it's both a positive opportunity, but it's also a challenge, because if we don't rise to it, if we don't bow before God, if we don't do the things that he's asked, then at some point we know it's very clear in the Bible, he judges nations. And we certainly are doing a lot right now to deserve judgment. I think God has been extremely merciful to America
Yes.
and to the faithful remnant in America, but that doesn't last forever.
We've only got a couple of minutes. I've got a twofold question. The first of which is, what is your website? Where can people find you online and follow you?
Yeah, johngwest.com is my website, and then you could find their links to. I'm fairly active on X now, not on Facebook, but so johngwest.com.
Try to help people understand what's unique about America. We've only got about 2 minutes, but compared to the nations of world history, the living condition of people throughout time and the governments under which people have lived, what is unique about the United States of America?
So, the great G.K. Chesterton, who was English, but came to America and then wrote a book where he said, in his view, America was the only nation founded on a creed, which then he talks about the Declaration of Independence. And I think that's actually quite controversial today. There's a lot of debate, even among conservatives. Are we a creedal nation? Look, I think it's both. There is certainly the biblical culture helps feed into our ideas. Nonetheless, America really is the first nation in world history founded on the idea that all men are created equal by God. That doesn't mean we're equal in everything, but in our fundamental rights, in our fundamental capacities, that we're created in the image of God. And that also means, actually, the founders believed that we were sinful. Another way we're equal is that we're sinful. That idea that we're created positively in the image of God, but they're also sinful, was a unique combination that has given us unparalleled, I would say, both prosperity, human rights, for all the problems in America. America is unique, I think, because of those ideals that were fed into by Christianity. But, and I think, I see even some Christians today trying to write off the principle of declarations. Oh, that was just propaganda, or that doesn't mean anything. No, the idea that our rights come from God and that we are fundamentally equal in a way that, say, the ancient Romans or Greece didn't think that you were. They thought some people just fit forever to be slaves, but that people have human dignity. That comes from Christianity, and that is embraced in our Declaration of Independence. And we need to celebrate that, and we need to teach our kids that, because one reason we're losing that, one reason for the insanity that we're seeing, is because people don't understand that, and they don't understand also, one final thing, that government isn't God. I mean, and so God is God. And so that also limits government power. And that's also a key contribution to the American founding that we're in danger of losing.
Well, and as Abraham Lincoln would say, the consent of the governed. I mean, that is a radical concept, isn't it?
And that flows from, and I write about this in the book, and I write about the attack on it in the book. It flows from the idea that we're created equal. That's why we shouldn't be ruled by unelected elites in the name of science or anything else. And the progressive era attack, I agree with Justice Clarence Thomas on this, was absolutely antithetical to both Christianity and the American founding.
Well, we've got to pull away. Thank you for your time, and more importantly, thank you for what you're doing for God and country. Our guest, John G. West. We've got another segment with Dran Reese of the Salt and Light Council. Again, I recommend Dr. West's book, Endowed by Our Creator. Stay tuned. I wrote a book. This is not my newest book, but it's called 10 Issues That Divide Christians. And we talk about a lot of things, the role of Christians in the political arena, but I write extensively about what is called American exceptionalism. Now, I find that a lot of Christians and even pastors don't know what that means, and there are more than 200 footnotes in this book, 10 Issues That Divide Christians. It was published by Bethany House. I recommend it simply because I love it when Christians get engaged and informed, and they feel confident, and they feel like they're able to influence those around them for citizenship and God and truth and the preservation of our liberties. Welcome back to the program. Before we continue on, I want to say a big thank you to Andrew Womack and the great crew that produces Truth and Liberty. I'm profoundly honored to be on. And I would advise you, please check out my website, alexmcfarland.com. We're in the middle of a 2-year tour that we're calling Revive US. You've heard us talk about the Great Awakenings. Well, we need a movement of God's Holy Spirit, and we're partnering with churches all over America. It's been my great joy to speak already in 51 citywide events where we get churches together, dozens of churches. And let me tell you, folks, the power of God's Holy Spirit is unleashed as Christians pray together. And we've got an event preparation manual that we'll send to you. And if you're interested in hosting a Revive US event in your city, just reach out to us. Go to alexmcfarland.com. We don't charge any money. We just want to come and help the Christians in your region and the churches come together, pray together, and proclaim Jesus to your part of the world. And so reach out to us. Well, let me tell you about somebody else that God is using in a great way. And I have such a respect for Dran Reese. Just hours ago, literally hours ago, before we recorded this edition of Truth and Liberty, I had the privilege of speaking to a group. I don't know how many it was, but it was well over 100 people that were logged in as part of the Salt and Light Council. And it was my joy to teach on the Constitution and then have questions. It was amazing. And I wanted you to meet the leader of the Salt and Light Council. She's an amazing woman of God. She's an amazing American patriot. She's being used in a great way. Her name is Dran Reese, and she's with us now on Truth and Liberty. Dran Reese, welcome, and thanks for all that you do.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure to have you on our show last night. Very encouraging.
Well, it is encouraging. And, you know, we hear so much bad news and so much about how things are unraveling. When I see people that are organized and equipped and enthused to stand for truth and the gospel, salt and light, I'm very much encouraged by that. So tell us about how you started this and what God is doing through the Salt and Light Council.
Well, I am a product of the Proposition 8 battle here in California for marriage back in 2008. Pastor Jim Garlow heard about our ministry. We had one of the largest Salt and Light ministries, that's the name that I gave it way back when. And he invited me to start helping to train pastors in California. And this before we had Salt and Light. This was just a ministry in a church. But I have a little bit of a marketing background, and I thought, you know, if you want me to do this, then I'm going to have to put something together that these pastors can implement easily. And so that's what I did back in 2008. And that's how Salt and Light Council was born. And we won that, Alex. We won marriage between a man and a woman until one circuit court judge decided to throw that out, and he should have been recused from that position. But the bottom line is that our ministry is still operational, and we've been actually very successful going around the country and helping to establish Salt and Light biblical citizenship ministries inside of churches across the nation.
Indeed, indeed. What is biblical citizenship?
Great question. Well, you and I both know that it's acting and behaving as a citizen of the United States, but according to our biblical standards, which we have completely outlined in our Bible. And it starts with the first 5 words of the Bible. In the beginning, man evolved. Oh, wait. In the beginning, God evolved. In the beginning, God created. Either he did or he didn't.
Yeah.
And so we tried to correct that inside the church with fabulous programs, such as what you're doing with your apologetics. And so many, there are others who have also created programs as well. And so I keyed into some of those early on. And I'm a model for what a Salt and Light Biblical Citizenship ministry can be in a church because I did everything from the grassroots level. I'm just an individual myself that got the call and wanted to know why we are not addressing some of these issues in America that are undermining our Christian culture. So when I come in, I'm thinking everybody wants to do salt and light. Well, I come to find out it's a little more difficult than that because it takes a special person to understand the writing on the wall for what's happening in our country. And it takes a special pastor who also is willing to engage. And so I have had a lot of years of experience now dealing with pastors and individuals, working at the grassroots level, top down from the pastors and a bottom up with the citizens. And so I have a lot of experience in this area, and I can help so many people understand how the church really operates and the things that we can do to encourage them to get involved and make it a team effort with the pastor and the individuals in the church.
Very famously, Benjamin Franklin, after the Constitutional Convention, and I'm sure he's a mutual friend, Eric Metaxas, has written about this, but a lady asked Benjamin Franklin, what sort of government do we have? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. Well, the preservation of America, the keeping of the republic, it very much is in the hands and the hearts and the actions of individuals, isn't it?
100%. And every time I hear that, my heart actually grieves because what we've done in America is we've brainwashed Americans to think that we're a democracy.
Oh,
And and
thank
that's
you.
part of the problem. We are a constitutional republic, and because of this brainwashing, so many people think that one particular party is more important than the other one, and the political parties both have some deep flaws in them, especially after the last few decades of being bullied, and pastors as well. But the fact is that our founding fathers did an incredible job of leaning deeply into the Lord and praying and building the freest, most prosperous nation in the world, which every immigrant wants to be in. And so our job as citizens is to preserve it. And we have to believe in this country and reestablish the patriotism that we once had, as what an incredible opportunity it is to live free and to have the opportunity to grow and prosper and build any kind of business that you want and be creative and be able to keep most of your money. But that's
Sure.
dwindling because the church, uh, I believe, is the number. Well, there's many faults, and I basically believe that media has really attacked the church over the last many decades, funded by, a radical left, to
Yeah.
paint Christians and pastors as homophobes, bigots, haters, none of which is true, but to minimize the importance and the influence of the church. So you and I are on a rescue mission, basically, now
Yeah.
to reestablish the church as the core central ingredient of a healthy, well-balanced society. And I, like you, accept the challenge, right?
I accept the challenge enthusiastically. Dran, virtually every university where I speak, every secular university, and weekend after weekend, I'm on the road. I love it. I'm in front of young people, college students, but endlessly I hear this. Well, our democracy this, or our democracy that, or there's an existential threat to democracy. I've asked students and professors, existential threat to democracy, what does that mean? And they really can't say. But circle back, if you would, to the statement that we need to reiterate. We are not a democracy. There is no existential threat to democracy because we're not a democracy. We're a Judeo-Christian representative republic, a free market economy. Why is this so vitally important? It's not just semantics, but we're not a democracy. We're a representative constitutional republic. Why is it important to make this distinction? And Dran, I'll even ask you, is the endless mantra, democracy, 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 is that an intentional use of words by the left?
Well, 100%. That is, again, brainwashing. This is what they're so good at. And of course, that's all in our media. That's all you ever hear about, including the right is using this word democracy. They should correct themselves. Sometimes I want to just jump through that screen and shake them awake. We are a constitutional republic.
Yes.
And why this is important is because look at our system of government that we have. We do not, our vote, a democracy is 50% plus one. Okay, and
Yeah.
that's really a majority vote, but that's not how it works here in our country. We elect representatives who represent us inside of our state and governmental federal legislatures. So that's what makes us a representative government versus a majority rule, because the majority can get it wrong sometimes, and we
Oh,
do
yeah,
not want that
absolutely.
to happen. It's sort of like if you committed a crime and all of a sudden the people around you just raised their hands and said, "You're guilty,"
Yeah.
before you have an opportunity to go and state your case. And that's really what this is about. We have a system of government that is considered fair and just, although we have a lot of work to do because I know that many of us are grieving over the fact that we're not seeing justice really happening in so many respects, from what they're doing to our poor children in these government indoctrination camps we call public schools, which is another topic I would very happily talk about.
Yes.
But also in our government and the media, it's just not fair anymore. And we have kind of given over the messaging systems of the Lord, government, media, and education, to a very radical leftist communist ideology. And then when you add all of that up with these the foreign invasion through immigration and, I don't know, other ways in which we now have uh, infiltration in almost every aspect of our country, Americans are in trouble. And if we don't wake up fast, and I'm hoping that the pastors will make the effort to understand what's going on. So, Alex, I have some ideas on why the pastors are not speaking up. Of course,
Yes.
that is my field of study for a long time, is why don't they speak up? What do they need? And then providing that for them. And so I do think that we have an opportunity right now, and there are pockets of revival happening. Really, revival is sort of like a disaster. Taking, for example, an earthquake. Okay, when do you think people prepare for an earthquake, Alex?
While the pictures are falling off the wall.
There it is. And they think to themselves, why didn't I do this sooner? And then they race out to the store and get prepared for the earthquake and future ones. But meanwhile, it's a little too late. People have been
Yeah.
injured and people have been hurt. So what I think you and I and other groups are out there trying to do is to shake the wicked out of the church, for
Yeah.
one, and get them to repent of their sins for their lack of involvement, and then provide them these tools to get involved. And I think this is where I come in with our Salt and Light ministry. We have a great, healthy, appropriate system for the church that is kind of under the radar. It's above the trees, but below the radar, so to speak, not bringing a hot button into the churches, but allowing them to be equipped and with great reporting systems, all legally vetted. We have, it's an incredible program, and it's very exciting to see, individuals and pastors working together inside of their church to take back, the governmental system or the educational system in their local communities.
I want to talk about public schools in a moment, but first, folks, let me just say you've probably heard of a church split before. Dran, I grew up in the South, down in the Bible Belt, and there are churches everywhere, a plethora of churches, but virtually every church, and I've spoken in more than 2,000 all throughout all 50 states, but churches have splits, and I've come to realize that virtually always the churches that split, sometimes very acrimoniously, they are of what's called a congregational form of government. Well, a congregational form of church government is pure democracy. 51%. That's why whenever they have a business meeting, it's like a knockdown, drag-out fight, and they conscript people who never darken the door on Sunday morning, but they'll come and vote on the business meeting, and it can get nasty. George Washington, our first president, said that America has a Presbyterian form of government. See, ecclesiology, the way churches run, and just as in the Presbyterian church, there are really representatives of the various people groups and their elders. Now, any church can have some sort of fallout or people get sideways, but the elder-led Presbyterian forms of church, I'm not talking about theology, I'm talking about just the administrative structure, they're very less likely to split. And Dran, I'll say this, having been in American church life a long time, whenever a church has what's called a congregational form of church government, or like Baptist, it can digress into mob rule. Now, it doesn't always, but I think the longevity, the sustainability of our government, at least up until recent decades, has been this representative, or as Washington said, Presbyterian form of order and structure. You've got the three branches of government. And it just was, I used to say it was genius on the part of the founders. I actually think it was actually superintended by Almighty God. And really, among the other things to be passionate about and to fight for, I think we need to, you're doing a good day's work in fighting for the awareness that we're a representative constitutional republic.
And we need to get people out to vote. And we need these people, when they do get out to vote, to know who they're voting for. And that's another aspect of our ministry that I'm very proud of, Alex, is that we started biblicalvoter.com, because that was the next question that once they did get involved and then the elections came along, they came to us and said, well, who do I vote for? So one thing that we did is that we created this website. We clearly delineated the differences between the Democrat and the Republican Party from a constitutional and biblical standpoint, and came up with about 40 to 60 differences just in their stated party platforms as one aspect to help people, in the church. They could read this, the pastor can use it as a sermon, so that we could start aligning it as a Psalm 1 moment with our values, aligning our values all the way around, instead of, standing in the way of the wicked or voting in the way of the wicked, which is oftentimes what many in the church are doing, because they are not truly discipled in how to apply what they've learned. So, back to your point about representative government, all of it is just one portion of it. All belongs in one soup bowl, basically, of the church. We are all of it. There isn't one issue in America that we have to walk away from. And when we look and find out who these elected officials are that we're putting into office, we should be very concerned, because we're not holding them to a higher standard. So what we did at biblicalvoter.com is we created a pledge. And that pledge is simply a half a page, 6 questions. Are you pro-life from conception to natural death? Are you pro-marriage between one man and one woman? Because that deals with the transgender issue. Are you pro-parental rights? In other words, when you have these children, you don't turn them over to a government school and they can take them away from you at will, or just brainwash them with any information that they want, not what you want. The fourth one is right of conscience, because if you don't have the right to your own conscience, that means the government is thinking for you, and we're in a communist country. The fifth one is free market principles, because you and I know that entrepreneurship is the heartbeat of America, and the creativity that's been involved. I mean, if we go to a socialist society where the government doles out what we're going to have and what we're going to eat, I mean, we are poverty-stricken and slaves. And then, of course, the last one, which we recently added, is that we are a constitutional republic under our God-given rights. Now, we put that in because recently, and again, it's like let's go over here and work on the transgender issue. But meanwhile, the whole Islamic issue is happening over here. So let's look at the hand over here. So we are now faced again with the threat of a very radical Islamic faction in this country. And you add that to the communists that are on the left, and you add in the Muslims, we've got the red-green axis occurring in our own country. And it is my sincere desire that I can help people understand to never, ever vote for anyone who will be against our constitutional republic, like Sharia law is against everything we believe in. So we can never vote for a Muslim into office. It's as simple as that. Because
oh my goodness.
We could go off into this topic, but again, people need to be aware of what their background is and whether they've signed the Family First Pledge, and do your level best, but not investigating who to vote for or just waiting to call a friend, phone a friend for your voting selection is not doing your due diligence as a citizen, a biblical citizen of the United States of America. And certainly that applies to all of us as Christians.
Let's talk about starting Salt and Light chapters in churches or communities. It can be both and, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be within a local church. It could be a group of concerned, engaged citizens just in a town, right? And if so, how do people get involved with the Salt and Light Council?
Well, first of all, we have a training program. They can go to our website, saltandlightcouncil.org, and just sign up for the training. We do not just let anybody go out with our ministry and represent the Salt and Light Council. Every person is vetted. First of all, we want to know who you are and what exactly are you going to do with Salt and Light? Because once they get a table and once they've been trained, they're kind of out of our control. Ditto with a church. Though we may develop a relationship with a pastor and he assigns a person, some lay person in his church to run the ministry, which can be an ex-governmental official or a lawyer. We've had business people, all sorts of people that run this ministry. Once he appoints that leader to come to our training, we basically plant the seeds, give you the first watering and the training, and then we step back and allow you to grow the ministry any way you want in your church, because that is the best plan for most churches. They don't want oversight. They don't want to be told what to do. I've learned that from pastors. But there is a small connection point with us. We provide a monthly newsletter where we at least give them some direction every month, which is a big deal to write and vet legally for every church. They can fold it, put it in their weekly bulletins, but also it drives people to come out and take action at the church level, writing postcards and getting involved on the spot in a church. And what happens is it starts to infuse this enjoyment for being involved when they start to take simple actions like write a few sentences on a postcard to an elected official, either thanking them for something they've done or to call attention to something they should be doing. And that's where we come in, as we provide at least some basic action steps for every church. So it's a great way to get involved, and I think this is what every church in America should be doing. And we've certainly perfected the way in which they can do it.
Indeed. What about for young people? Does the Salt and Light Council involve, teenagers or college students?
Yes, as a matter of fact, as part of your adult Salt and Light, that is, we have a teen newsletter that can be used in the youth groups inside of a church. And so it's also legally vetted, and we encourage involvement. For the most part, biblical courses, on the Constitution, the history of America, these belong to our children. In fact, in my opinion, since they're going to the government schools, that it's an essential service that we could be offering to the students inside of the churches. And another thing on this, Alex, an alarming, through George Barna, alarming statistic is that only 37% of the pastors have a biblical worldview and 17% of the youth pastors. So think about that. Would you want your kids to tutored or, shepherded by a young pastor who may or may not have our biblical worldview, I think it's pretty frightening. So parents have the full responsibility for raising their children and then insisting that these churches also offer a form of biblical citizenship training as well.
Absolutely. And, especially, I mean, there are the issues of our rights coming from God and the Constitution and the moral guardrails of our nation. But I think even about things like our relationship with the nation of Israel, I'm with pastors all the time, traveling, doing citywide events. And you're right, the biblical worldview of our clergy, and especially the willingness to get out of the comfort zone and be involved and speak hard truth to the 120 million church members that need to hear it, sometimes it's just not there. Let me ask you this about electing Muslims to office. And Muslims, I had a 4-hour conversation with the vice president of CAIR, C-A-I-R, the Council on American Islamic Relations, a known terrorist organization. And in the last election in 2024, they successfully ran and got elected several Islamic senators, congressmen, mayors, city council members, school board members. So they're active. The VP of CAIR just calmly told me that the Constitution will fall. America will become an Islamic caliphate at some point. So believe me, folks, there are those more committed to that which is false than some of us are committed to that which is true. But Dran, if you would, about Muslims and Sharia sympathizers holding elected office, has that ship already sailed, and is it too late to do anything about it?
It's never too late. It's never too late to fight the good fight. And I say, folks, get in there and start understanding who's running for office. Don't vote certain people into office that are against our Constitution, and those are those that are of the Muslim faith. I'm sure there's some very good Muslims out there, but for the most part, we know through all the training that's coming out that it's part of what they do, which is to lie to you and to deceive you and to take over our country and to turn us into subjects that will either pay taxes to them or get our heads cut off. I mean, it's very serious, folks. I certainly, as a woman, don't want to go back into the dark ages and have to wear a hijab and I don't know, just we have to stop and wake up to the threats that are here in America, and there are a lot of threats. But what I love about our ministry, Salt and Light Council, and by the way, Alex, when you said that you spoke to so many pastors, I have to say I should be trailing with you. You get these pastors fired up, and then I should be there to be the closer to get them to have a Salt and Light ministry. Think about how many churches we could really open up day to day to be actively involved. But that is the goal. The pastors are there, they're available, and they will do it if we encourage them.
Dran, thank you so much. Give your website one more time, please.
saltandlightcouncil.org.
saltandlightcouncil.org. Well, Alex McFarland saying thank you for watching. Thanks to the crew, the production staff of Truth and Liberty. I'll be at the Summer Family Bible Conference on the campus of Charis Bible College come July. You can go to the website and learn all about it. In the meantime, stay bold, stand strong, speak truth, and may God bless you and use you.
I want to let you know that we are having a very special celebration for the 250th anniversary of this nation. Our Summer Family Bible Conference is going to be totally devoted to this, and we're going to have Alex McFarland, Tim Barton, David Barton, Richard Harris, myself, there's others coming, and it's just going to be celebrating this nation, talking about the freedoms and the liberties that we have. So join us the 29th of June through the 3rd of July.